The cemetery was quiet except for the whisper of wind brushing through the brittle winter trees. Frost clung to the edges of weather-worn headstones, and the sky hovered in shades of pale grey, threatening snow. A small girl, no older than 10, stepped carefully along the crooked stone path, a wilted bouquet clutched in her tiny, trembling hands. Her coat was 2 sizes too big, her shoes soaked through, but her eyes burned with purpose. She walked like someone who had done this many times before. She stopped at a modest grave near the far corner, one not dressed with marble or grand inscriptions, just a small, flat stone, nearly hidden by the overgrown grass. Gently she knelt and placed the flowers down. They were dandelions mostly, and a single rose, the last one she'd found in the trash behind a florist's shop. Her lips moved in silence as she whispered something to the stone, then kissed her fingers and pressed them against the name etched into it. She didn't know someone was watching. A sleek black car had parked quietly across the road, its tinted windows hiding the man inside. He'd come here by accident. His driver had taken a wrong turn. But the sight of that small girl, alone with a grave and a broken bouquet, pulled something sharp from the deepest corners of his soul. "Stop here," the man had said. And now he stood beneath the crooked iron gate, his tailored coat billowing in the wind. He watched as the girl reached into her pocket and pulled out a folded, torn piece of paper. She carefully placed it beneath the flowers, weighted it down with a pebble, and whispered again. Then, as she turned to leave, her eyes met his. She paused, startled. He didn't move. "Sorry," she mumbled, stepping aside, her voice barely audible. "I didn't mean to get in your way." But the man didn't answer. He stepped forward slowly, as if pulled by invisible strings. As he approached the grave she'd just left, the girl hesitated. "You shouldn't go there," she said quietly. It's not your kind of grave." The man stopped, staring at the stone. "What do you mean?" he asked. The girl looked down. "It's for someone who mattered, but only to me." He knelt slowly, as though his legs were about to give out. His fingers brushed the paper she left behind. And when he read what it said, his face changed. He gasped, and his knees gave way fully. He collapsed, not just from shock, but something deeper. The pain in his chest didn't come from the cold. The paper fluttered slightly in his trembling hand as he looked up at the girl, his eyes wide. Who wrote this?" he asked, voice cracking. The girl blinked. "I did." And then the man whispered one word, like a ghost escaping his lips. "Impossible." He stared at the note as though it had split open time itself. It wasn't just the handwriting, though he recognized it, fragile and curling like ivy. It was the words. The exact words. The same ones his late wife used to write to their unborn daughter in the leather-bound journal she kept hidden in her drawer. A journal buried with her the day she died in childbirth. And now, here they were, written by a child, word for word. He looked up at the girl again. Her eyes were wide and innocent, but behind them swirled a sorrow too old for her age. She stood there shivering, not from the cold, but from something deeper, as if part of her knew what this moment meant. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "My name is Lila," she said. "I come here every Thursday. Today's her birthday. She was my angel." The man flinched. "Her?" Lila nodded slowly. "The lady in the photo inside the grave. I never met her, but I found her picture once, at the old shelter downtown. The woman there told me her name. Said she used to talk about having a baby girl, but the baby didn't make it. Said she died crying the name Lila. I thought maybe she was crying for me. His breath caught in his throat. He tried to speak but couldn't. She stepped closer and pulled something from her pocket. A small, cracked locket. She opened it and held it out to him. Inside was the photo. His wife, smiling, pregnant, radiant, wearing the same necklace she wore the night he proposed. I found it in a box outside the shelter, Lila said. It was wrapped in a scarf with her name stitched inside. I didn't steal it, I swear. I just thought, maybe she's watching over me. Maybe she meant for me to find it. Tears slid silently down his face. He hadn't seen that photo in over a decade. Hadn't told anyone about the necklace. And now it was here, in the hands of a little girl who bore an uncanny resemblance to the woman he had lost. The same eyes, the same stubborn curve of the chin. "Do you have parents, Lila?" he asked gently. She looked down. "Number I had a foster home once, but they didn't want me. Said I was too quiet, too strange. I don't remember my real parents, just that I was left at a hospital when I was born." The man closed his eyes. Everything began to spin. His wife had gone to labour early, alone. He was in another country on business, unreachable. The hospital said she passed before they could save the baby. But what if they had been wrong? What if the baby had lived? He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a weathered letter, the last one his wife ever wrote. Her handwriting was shaky, her words filled with fear and love. "If our daughter lives, name her Lila. Tell her I already love her more than life itself." He looked up at the girl, now huddling against the wind, and suddenly it all made sense. The letters, the locket, her face, her name. This wasn't coincidence. "Lila," he whispered, stepping toward her. "You said today is her birthday?" She nodded. "I bring flowers every year, even if they're just dandelions. She deserves something." His hands shook as he reached for his phone. He didn't know what he was doing. He just knew everything had changed, and for the first time in years he knelt in front of a grave, not out of grief, but hope. "You're not alone anymore," he said, his voice cracking. "Not for another day in your life." And with that, he opened his arms. Lila hesitated. Her small feet stepped forward slowly, unsure. Then she ran into his embrace, like something inside her had always known. They sat on the cold stone bench beneath the weeping willow, Lila curled against him like she'd always belonged there. The sky had turned to a deep velvet, and the graveyard had gone still. Just the hush of wind in the grass and the steady rhythm of two hearts finally finding their beat. He told her stories about the woman in the photo, about how she used to dance barefoot in the rain, how her laughter sounded like wind chimes, how she used to talk to her belly every night, telling the baby inside that she was the greatest miracle the world would ever know. Lila listened, silent but wide-eyed, as though each word filled a hole in her chest she'd carried since birth. "Do you really think she was my mum?" she whispered, voice trembling. He turned to her and smiled through his tears. "I don't think, Lila. I know." And he did. That night they didn't go to a shelter. They didn't go back to the city. He took her home, to the mansion on the hill that once felt like a museum of sorrow. He carried her past the empty guest rooms, down the hall where his wife's painting still hung, and into the nursery that had been locked for over 10 years. He opened the door. Dust danced in the moonlight, but everything was exactly as it had been. The crib, the hand-sewn quilts, the wall painted with stars and moons. A name above the window, faded but still legible. Layla. She stood frozen at the doorway, eyes filling with wonder. You already named it for me. I did, he said, before I even knew you were out there. Before I even knew I had a second chance. That night, she slept in the crib that had waited a decade just for her. He sat by her side, holding her hand like it was the only thing anchoring him to this new reality. And when she drifted into sleep, a tiny smile on her lips, he whispered a promise into the dark. I will never leave you again. You are mine, and I am yours. The next morning, the news exploded. Billionaire reunites with daughter given up for dead. DNA confirms unbelievable twist in lost child case. Graveyard flowers lead to family miracle. Reporters camped outside the mansion. The world wanted to know everything. But inside, the noise didn't matter. Because Lila wasn't a headline. She was a child finally held, finally loved. He didn't care about the stocks or the business deals anymore. He shut down his company for a week and dedicated every moment to Lila. Ice cream dates, walks through the garden, long talks where she finally spoke about the dark nights in shelters, the homes that didn't want her, the hunger that gnawed at her, both in stomach and spirit. And with each word she let go, he wrapped her in the warmth of something she'd never had before. Belonging. On her next birthday, the grave didn't receive wilted wildflowers. It was covered in roses, candles. A song played from a small speaker, a lullaby his wife used to hum. And beside the stone, Lila stood tall, hand in hand, with the man who once knelt there in grief, but now stood in grace. She whispered, Happy birthday, Mummy. I found him, and he found me. As they walked away, the wind carried her words across the graveyard, gentle and sure. Somewhere, somehow, the woman in the photo smiled, and the girl who once brought flowers to a stranger's grave left with a father's hand in hers, and a future blooming bright as spring.